Hey, this is David, and if you're new here, then that makes sense because this is actually my first full-length YouTube woodworking video. And I've made quite a few epoxy tables in my past, but this one caused me a little bit of problems, so I figured it would be a good one for my first woodworking video. And I got these burly Laurel Oak slabs, which I've never even seen burly Laurel Oak before, so this was kind of like a treat. I found these in a storage unit about 5 minutes away from my house, and the guy wanted next to nothing for them. So I got these slabs, I want to say, at like $200 or something like that for both of them. They were a very, very good price for something that was really interesting looking. And you know, I feel kind of blessed, honestly, because I get a lot of cool wood down here in Florida, and it seems like it's slept on. It really does. All I ever see on YouTube is walnut or maple, or I mean, those are the two main wood species on YouTube is walnut, maple. That's all anybody uses, and nobody knows about these beautiful Florida woods that we have down here. So I feel very blessed, like I said, to be able to use this wood and show you guys what our wood looks like. And today we're using super clear epoxy. The client requested a 3D type of beach table, which I've done a ton of them in the past, so this is kind of my wheelhouse. I do them all the time. Mostly people come to me for the beach style, and they kind of always want like the waves and all of that stuff, so I'm happy to do it. Honestly, I mean, you know, it's kind of my style. So I always use tabletop epoxy whenever I do these beach type pours, because I can do a layer, I can mess with the colors, it cures super quick, and then I can come back the next day and do another layer. So you can really stack layers of epoxy very easily with the tabletop stuff, and you don't even really have to sand in between whenever you pour. If, like, let's say you pour at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, you can come back and pour at 5 or 6 o'clock the next evening and be fine. And you can get a table poured, I guess it's about the same amount of days, because I usually do about five to six pours of clear on top of the color that they chose, and then the waves and all of that stuff. So it usually takes about 5 or 6 days anyway, but at the end of those 5 or 6 days, you've got, you know, different levels of cured epoxy, but you can still take it out, plane it, and then, you know, start sanding it and getting it ready for finish. So that's kind of what I like about doing it this way, instead of the deep pour and then you have to wait 5-6 days or whatever. It just depends on how cold it is outside and what kind of deep pour you use, but typically you have to wait at least a couple days before you can even do anything to the table. And actually with this method, at least you get to just pour and pour and pour, so every day you're doing a pour. So it probably, I would say that it keeps you more interested in the project because you're kind of maintaining it every single day. And I missed the footage whenever I did the waves and all that, and I do apologize. Next video I will make sure that I include the art process within the table. I flaked, you know, I fumbled. It happens, goofed. But here I am using my homemade flattening jig to flatten this table. This is just a melamine box that I made, and I've recently upgraded my flattening jig to the Speed Tool Kratos, which I like a lot because the Z axis on it. Whenever you're using a box like this, you only really get the amount of up and down that the router allows, and you can put blocks under the ends and kind of lower it and raise it a little bit, but you're really limited on the Z axis, unfortunately. And we're using 610 by West Systems to fill in all of the holes and cracks and crevices, and this stuff actually is pretty cool. It's a 2-part epoxy, and you have to mix it together after you use the mixing tube once. Once you use it once, it's basically, you know, useless. So I just put the cap back on because you only use a little bit at a time, and you can continue to just mix it up and then use it, and then you can mix any colors in with you want, and it's really thick and it fills in any cracks and crevices super duper easy. Mounting these legs is always a challenge. I'll say this about table making and epoxy tables and all that stuff, is that for some reason, I don't know why, but mounting legs is always a struggle. And using this Milescraft drill guide makes things so much easier because you know you're gonna get a straight 90-degree hole and your threaded inserts will go down there and fit properly, and and you have a stop block so you're not going to go too deep. And this was my solution because I had a lot of problems with holes just going all over the place and me not able to get my threaded inserts in, and it's a pain. So if you're in the market, I would definitely suggest the Milescraft one. The Rockler one is like twice as expensive, so I don't even know why anybody would buy it. I mean, I don't know if there's some features on it that I'm not aware of, that something that it does that the Milescraft one doesn't do. I don't understand why it's so expensive. But anyways, we always use threaded inserts on our tables because, I mean, it holds better. This is just the proper way to do it. So back in the day, I remember whenever I was, just starting out, I used the little wood screws that came with a lot of the table legs that you get off Amazon, and you really don't want to use those. I mean, you can only use them like 2 or 3 times, like take them out and put them back in, and then your holes are useless. That's what she said. But I missed the first pour. This was kind of like the seal coat first pour. Did miss a lot of epoxy pouring footage, unfortunately, and here's where it gets all kinds of bad. We're finishing this slab. I live in Florida, and I was working on the top, and I didn't flip it over and finish the bottom because it's really heavy. So instead of doing the bottom, I worked on the top and left the bottom exposed, which is a problem. So now I left it clamped for about a week to my table, and hopefully it is not warped anymore. So luckily, I was able to get that fixed by putting a bunch of heaters in the room, and I spread wet towels over the backside of the table and left it clamped for about, I would say, 3 or 4 days. And luckily, it did the trick, and the table did flatten out. And I've never dealt with that issue before. I've never had a table warp like that. Usually, it's the epoxy that actually warps. And when the epoxy warps, you can take the table outside and cover it with some black tarps and just leave it on flat surface, and usually it will flatten out eventually. It has happened on epoxy parts of tables before, but never on the actual wood part, and you could see part of the pith in the end of those slabs, so you could just tell exactly where, it was going to curl up. Like once I looked at it and looked at the edge, I could see why that happened. But I'm using Total Boat Halcyon to seal up the bottom, and I did about 5 coats of this Total Boat Halcyon just to make sure the bottom was completely sealed, so I didn't have the same warping bowing problem that I had before. I was really relieved that I was able to flatten it out because I did not want to make this table again. Like, I don't know if you've ever made a table twice, but it's not a fun process. Nobody should ever have to go through that, and I've had to go through it only once, but it was terrible, and it just seemed like just such a waste of time, and it was all because of my own mistakes. But I mean, sometimes it is what it is. That's just kind of the business of things, and if you want to do something right, you want the customer or client to be happy, then you kind of have to go through some struggles every once in a while in this business to be able to make it work. And like I said, I did not do a good job filming, so I did 2 coats on top, and I still had a couple of spots that were lumpy and weird, and I think that I just didn't use enough epoxy, and also all of the holes in the top weren't sealed. So I came back, sanded everything flat with, believe it or not, that's a Warrior sander. So that is literally a Walmart sander that I've had for about 4 years now, and it does a really good job of dust collection, and it's still kicking. It's still kicking. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I've been using it for years, and I don't see any point in replacing like a tool that works. And this is another tool that actually works fairly well. I had a Bosch 75 GET, and it broke. It stopped working. The brushes were worn out, and my brother was fixing it for me, but in the meantime, I had to have a 6-inch sander for making tables. So I ordered the Viver off of Amazon, and so far it's been pretty good. I think it might be a just Chinese knockoff of the Bosch, honestly. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what it is because it feels exactly the same. So I wouldn't put it past them that it's just a Chinese knockoff. But I sanded the table, I got it flat again, and I'm prepping to do an epoxy pour. For some reason, sometimes people think that you have to sand the table all the way up to like 120. Really, you just have to get it flat to do a flood coat. And for the flood coat, I'm using crystal clear epoxy. I think it's what it's called, clear coat, something like that. I saw it at Woodcraft and I ran out of super clear, so this is just kind of what I grabbed and used. It's fairly good. It's made in Florida, so it's kind of formulated to, you know, our heat and humidity down here, and I haven't had too many bad experiences with it. It's not like a high-end name brand epoxy, but it does the job. And it does have UV protection in it, so that's good. And honestly, look at these slabs, bro. Look at that. That is gorgeous. Like I said, burly Laurel Oak. This is some crazy looking wood, and it almost pains me to do an epoxy top coat on it because the bottom looked so beautiful whenever I just did the halcyon. And sometimes people want high gloss, and I get that. And, you know, you have to give the client what they want, but I think that would have been much cooler if it would have just been like a natural finish on it. And if you know anything about epoxy top coats, you know that you're never going to get a perfectly flat top coat whenever you like pour a flood coat. I mean, you can. It's possible. It's just not probable, and it's kind of hard to do. So what I like to do is once I do my final flood coat, I sand the table, and I usually start it around 220 or so, and I sand the table down, get it as flat as I possibly can, and then I come back, wet sand it up to 3000, and then I use usually the 3M Perfected kit to polish it. So right here I'm wet sanding. It's a step. And unfortunately, I did have another problem pop up that I found whenever I was wet sanding. I was hoping that I could wet sand it out, but it didn't work out like that. And this is the area. So I wasn't sure exactly what to do at this point. I decided to go get some UV resin from Woodcraft. I thought that might be a good idea. And I just drilled out the area that was bad. I thought about using a grinder, but I thought this was probably a better method. A lot of times when you drill into epoxy to repair it, you can see the drill in the epoxy afterwards because the clear won't match perfectly, but luckily this was on top. So all I did was just remove that ugly area with the drill, and then you'll see here I've got beautiful shots of drilling. Oh, that's so sexy. And then I just filled it in with the UV resin, and I tried to, you know, flatten it out, make it as flat as humanly possible. And once I did that, then I hit it with the light for about 2 minutes or so. I think it was maybe even less than that, and it was super hard. Like, I was surprised. So I was fairly happy with it. It looked good right there. I decided to wet sand it flat because I figured I didn't want to scratch up the area around it, and you can't even see where that patch was. You can see it a little bit. Once I polished the table, though, you can't see it at all. So if you ever need to repair an epoxy top coat, this is a good way to do it, I would say. And once I did that, I was able to continue wet sanding all the way up to 3000. And once I got to 3000, I started polishing. And honestly, I think that this table is more durable whenever you do the sanding and polishing as opposed to just doing an epoxy top coat. It feels like it scratches easier if you just do epoxy and you don't sand and polish. It's like this almost makes the epoxy harder for some reason. I'm not sure if that's true. It's probably not. It's probably just all in my head. But that's what I think, and that's how I feel about it. But after we got done polishing, went ahead and slapped the flowy line legs on it, got it outside for some shots. Bam! Look at that beautiful table. Look at that wood. Fantastic. I was really happy with the way this table turned out. The flowy line legs look really good on it. Shout out to them. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please come back for more. Subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks. I'm out. Peace.